It is great to be here this evening. I think when you come together in a room like this with people who've given up their Friday night to engage in a seminar like this, you kind of get the sense you're in probably one of the rooms with some of the nicest people in the world. So it's really good to be here with you. I really appreciate you being here on this Friday night. And my sincere hope is that you will walk away with something for yourself in terms of how we might better engage with the people around us in spiritual conversations. And of course, as the slightly sort of morphing title suggests, we're going to be looking to Jesus for our model for this kind of thing. I don't know about you. I love this topic. I've been quite passionate about this for a number of decades now. This idea of how do we have engaging, effective spiritual conversations with the people around us. My experience of spiritual conversations over the last 30 years or so haven't always been great ones. They haven't gone so well. I haven't been felt great about even doing it. It's problematic. I don't feel like people are terribly interested. There's a lot of things, I guess, that have come to me around this topic, and so I spent a fair bit of time thinking about it and reflecting on it over the years. So I really do sincerely hope there'll be something from tonight that will be meaningful for you. I'll be doing a bit of presenting from up here. Sometimes I'll ask you to do something yourself. Sometimes I might ask you to comment and share an idea or ask a question. So there's a few different ways that I'm hoping to engage with you tonight over the next little while. When you see the topic for tonight, the title, as I've kind of settled on it, spiritual conversations in brackets like the ones Jesus had, you might notice the subtle inference that possibly there is a way that we can have spiritual conversations that aren't like the ones that Jesus had. And I don't know what your experience of that has been, but when I think about, I think I first got involved in children's and youth ministry when I was about 14, so I'm 51 now, and so whatever, I'm not very good at maths, but it is over 35 years since someone gave me a go. Someone gave me a go. They asked me if I would help them as a Sunday school teacher, on a primary school camp or something. Of course, the preparation, one of the ways that they prepare you is to help you have these kind of spiritual conversations with people. They prepare you to, how do you share Jesus with someone else? How do you share the gospel? How do you do evangelism? How do you evangelize someone else? So when I think about my beginning kind of experience in this area, it goes back to when I was a young teenager, and it goes back into early stages of, I guess, what now has become a career for me in children's and youth ministry. And when I look back on some of the training that I received as a young person, I have questions about that now. Over time, when I think about those experiences, when I think about those struggles, when I think about the things that didn't work, when I think about that people weren't that interested, we used to just put that down to the fact that people were sinful and bad, and I'm trying to tell them something good, but if they're not really listening, it's got nothing to do with me and my technique or my approach or the way I'm doing it. It's got to do with their kind of badness. They're just not responding to the good news of Jesus. But sometimes you've got to stop. Hey, you've got to stop and just ask a few questions and say, what if it's not about that? What if I've got to put that kind of lens a little bit inward? We'll start asking some questions about, have I quite understood that correctly? Have I got that right? Have I delved a bit deeper than beyond what people are telling me and actually started to look at scripture and see what it is that Jesus might have to really say about this, or to look at what Jesus really did about this? And I guess that's part of being a part of a community like around a theological college, is to have those experiences of just stopping, pausing, asking, reflecting, and engaging deeply into scripture and see if there's something there for us that maybe we hadn't seen before or hadn't been told before. So that's kind of a little bit about where we're heading tonight. We're going to have a look at this idea of what does it mean to have engaging spiritual conversations with people. But we're going to look to Jesus as our model to do that. Just for a bit of fun, just to start off with something a bit light, because it is Friday night and we should have a little bit of a good time while we're here. And we're going to have a look at a little bit of a video that you may love some of it, but I'm kind of presenting it tonight maybe as a little bit of an idea of some of the things maybe we should be stepping away from in our spiritual conversation. So I'll hand over to Rob and he's going to press the magic button. Now he gets full marks for enthusiasm. Hey, like there's certainly a lot of heart there. But look, and really that's just a little bit of fun to start with. But when I think back to my early times of training as a young teenager in the area of children's and youth ministry. And people were wanting to prepare me to be able to share this message with children and young people. And as I grew up with my peers and friends, and as I grew up into an adult with adults, there certainly was a lot of, even though it's caricatured in that video, a lot of that kind of stuff going on. There was a lot of language, there was a lot of jargon. There was a very kind of one-way thing going on. When I think about what I was taught or trained in when I was young, to have a spiritual conversation wasn't really much of a conversation at all. It was really a presentation. It wasn't so much a dialogue as a monologue. It would actually be, I've got this thing to tell you and I want to share that, and you will receive that and take that on and hopefully tick a box and say yes to it. Hopefully you'll make that a part of your life. Make a response. But it's very much a one-way process. When I think about that, that's one of the things I think about. The other thing that I think about that was a feature of some of that training was that it was a very one-size-fits-all process. So essentially what I had in my tool belt was one story to tell, and it was that kind of broad, big picture God story, and it was God made the world good, and then people ruined it, and Jesus came and saved us. We now have to make a choice, and then that will kind of work out our eternal destiny. That is that gospel story, that broad story. But really to have shared the gospel, or to have evangelized someone, which kind of sounds a bit icky. It sounds like something that really is done to someone, isn't it? Rather than a nice mutual, respectful engagement. But to have evangelized someone, it was to have taken that message, to have kind of shared that in a one-way, style with somebody. It could be written or verbal, and then they would have, their job was to receive that, and hopefully you would then engage, that they would then say yes to that. Maybe sometimes you would get a little bit of pushback, and so you had some, some answers ready for those questions. So you were doing apologetics or doing that. Now, all of these things actually really do have their place, but my sense of that training in my early years was that was all there was. That was really what it meant to evangelize. That was really what it meant to share the gospel. That was really what it meant to have a spiritual conversation. But as I grew up, I guess I found just sharing that story, feeling like this one-way process, I did struggle. I didn't feel very comfortable doing it. I didn't really want to do it that way. Sometimes I felt like the people I was having those conversations with felt a bit like projects rather than people. They were my evangelism contacts or targets. And something felt a bit wrong about that. It did feel a little bit icky. And certainly as I tried to do that with people, the response you'd kind of get back was a sense of, this is feeling a bit icky on the receiving end as well. And of course, a lot of people have had those experiences of evangelism, and then now there's that connotation for them, that negative connotation. And so I guess over the years, I know I asked a lot of questions about that for myself. I said, I don't really get what this discomfort is it about. Is it just that I'm not good at it? Is it I'm not a good enough Christian because I'm not into it? I haven't got the skills yet. I'm not a good evangelist. I really did put a lot of those questions on to myself and gave myself a hard time about that. But over time, I guess I started to ask different sets of questions about that and started to wonder what it might mean that actually there's something wrong or something worth challenging about this whole way we understand how we're supposed to talk with other people about their spiritual journeys. This came to a real head for me when I started to work as a school chaplain in 1997. So I'm not sure what you know about school chaplaincy, but one of the things about school chaplaincy is it's a no evangelism zone. All right, so they have policy statements that are as clear as no evangelism, no proselytizing. I love that word. No proselytizing. Yeah, I can't spell it. I try and write it. I can never write it. But no evangelism, no proselytizing. It's as clear as that. And that's not just for chaplains. That's just schools of those kind of places. You could be an RI teacher. You could be a volunteer in a school. You could be a teacher. It's not a place where this thing called evangelism is welcome. So when I became a chaplain, that was a real challenge to me. I had one tool in my tool belt for spiritual conversations. And I turn up to the school and they say, you can't use that tool. So what did that leave us with? What did that leave me with? Well, it didn't leave me with very much. Didn't really know what to do. I didn't want to just be a person that did good things. There's nothing wrong with being good things, and there's a lot of deep spirituality embedded in good things. But I wanted to be able to talk to people. I wanted to be able to share with people and ask them about the meaning of their life and how their life was going and those kind of deeper existence kind of questions. I wanted to have conversations around what they thought about God, what they thought about the world and where it was heading and their place in it. I wanted to have those conversations, but I wasn't really sure how I was supposed to go about that if I couldn't use the one tool that I'd been given in my training, my tool belt. So really, there was a big journey that had gone on for me, and I know for SU as a movement as a whole, as we tried to work out what does it mean to have effective, engaging spiritual conversations with people in schools and communities that make sense not just to that context out there, but has integrity to our faith as well. And that's really what we're wanting to have a look at today. And I found that as we had a go, as we had a crack, as we tried some things, as we opened ourselves up and saw those restrictions in the schools, not as restrictions, but as our teacher, we started to sort of be open to the learning that those messages were giving us. The school was saying, these are the kind of spiritual conversations that we want to have, or that we're able to have. And that was part of a bit of a signpost to say, what is it we can learn from what people tell us and the resistance they have and the feedback they give us? And rather seeing that as criticism or rather seeing that as restriction, to go, what am I supposed to learn from that? What can I take away from that? How can I allow that pushback to become my teacher? And then as we kind of engaged with that, we went back to scripture and we said, let's dig a bit deeper. Let's have a little bit of a look at Jesus and what he did and how he engaged with people, and see if there's something we can learn from that as well. And how can we bring these things together? And that for me has really been a big part of the journey of the last 20 years. And so what I'm going to share with you tonight is really a culmination of that journey, or where it stands at the moment. It's not finished yet. And it really is part of the training we actually give our chaplains around how to engage with spiritual conversations in their schools with people that has integrity to that community context, but also has integrity to our faith. So let's start by getting you guys just to, wrong way, think about something. I'm just going to get you to just to think for a minute about spiritual conversations that you've had. So there may be one that you've had recently, or just maybe one that you have found memorable, that kind of sticks with you a little bit. I want you to think about a spiritual conversation that you've had in the last little bit. Just going to give you 30 seconds, a minute, just to think about that. And what was that about? What was the topic of it? What came up? What are some of the things that happened in it? All right, and then I'll just give you, after half a minute, I'm going to ask if there's anybody who just wants to tell us one or two things about the spiritual conversation that they remember. And Linda has got a microphone, and if you just kind of put your hand up when you're ready, she will give you the microphone so that others and people online can hear you. So just take half a minute to think about that, and then I'm going to ask you what you got to say. Okay, is there anybody who wants to start? What was the spiritual conversation that is coming to your mind? What was it about? Or what was something about it that was interesting that you wanted to share with a big group? Anyone brave? Here we go.
On the 30th of December 2020, I had a conversation with a lady at Victoria Point bus stop. Well, I just didn't go. I prayed about it and I went. Like, my prayer was, bring somebody that I can share Jesus with. And at the bus stop, this lady came. And like in Australia, the culture is different. I cannot just go to someone and start telling them about Jesus. So I prayed that that person has to come to me and talk to me first. So that was what happened at the bus stop. And then I started talking with her, encouraging her. She told me that she gave her heart to Jesus, but she still had some things in her life that she's praying about to quit, like smoking and drinking and all that. And then I started encouraging her.
Oh, awesome. That's fantastic. It's lovely to hear about that sense of preparedness and openness and to what God might have in store for you as you come across people. That's wonderful. Thank you. Someone else? Yep. Thank you.
Just very simply, when I was working at school, um, a teacher came up to me and just sat down one morning and said, just looked at me fair in the eye and said, "What makes you tick?" And we went, so just very briefly, but sort of said, okay, and just talked a little bit about faith. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a really important point that just raises in my head is the background of a lot of our conversations will, of course, be the life that we live in conjunction with people, that sort of questions that people have got about your life and how you live and something that they might see that surprises them or makes them wonder. And so it's really important for us to kind of acknowledge how important that can be for people, that the words that we will have will often come out of this backdrop of a life lived. So thanks for that. That's awesome. Anyone else would like to just give us a sense of some of the conversation? Here we go, Rob.
I find just in everyday conversations at different places of like, especially like when I'm at karate or something like that I do, and people ask me what I do for a living, that's all I ever have to do is I just say,
That's
oh,
right.
I'm a principal and lecturer at a theological college, and they either look at me blankly and they just kind of move on.
Yeah, I'm sorry I asked. Yeah.
Or for some reason, and I get this quite often, they seem to try to, in their own mind, justify, oh yeah, I'm not religious or I don't go to church, and I just kind of say, oh, that's great, if you ever want to talk. And so just starting that friendship by just talking about what I do.
Yeah, and certainly I found that as a chaplain, it wasn't too hard in some ways to initiate conversations. You almost had a target on you for those kind of things. If anyone was going to have a conversation in that place, it was going to be you. Yes, that's right. Thanks, Rob. Just anyone? Here we go. Thank you.
Two that I've had lately have been both in the same vein. It's people who have a need. And one was a family that had just lost a loved one, and the other one was a family whose son is going through a lot of trouble. So that going at that point of need was an important thing for me. But the hardest conversation I ever had was where, somebody just started out straight in the conversation and said, you might as well believe in a unicorn as believe in God. I went, where do I go from there?
That's right. The one I hear is the flying spaghetti monster. I think that's the one the secularists like to say. Might as well believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Oh, okay. But yeah, points of need, when people are in that sort of shaky state a bit where the things they've built their foundations on are kind of, looking a bit shaky. So it's a time for question asking at that deeper level, So yeah, really, really important times where people are asking those deeper questions. Anyone else? We don't have to labour this too long, but there's some great things coming out there.
Just one other thing I've got my daughters don't follow the Lord, and I've learnt to just be quiet and just answer the question and not expand too much, but just answer the question, and they'll listen to that, and then we continue on with life. But yeah, that's been a lesson for me to just learn to shut up.
Because you can get a bit excited, can't you? If someone opens the door a crack, you kind of want to, it's the floodgates open a little bit to mix the metaphor up a little bit. Anyone else? I'm happy to move on from there, but that's really, really great. There's some really good things there. And these are the conversations that are coming up. They can be with people about their need, about their past religious, spiritual experiences. Can be about the things they do and don't believe, the things they can get quite excited and emphatic about. I think for me, it's really important for us to think about a few things that might sit underneath these conversations that have people. And for me, it's really important to acknowledge that people are made by God to be in relationship with God. For me, that's the starting point. But I actually see everybody as God's child. They just kind of forgot. Just have not been aware of that. When I read the prodigal son story, that's the message I get from that. These kids were always that father's son. They just lost their way. They just forgot. The father says to the one at home, everything I have is yours. You've always been with me. The other son, the naughty one, he comes home and he tries to get through his spiel about how he's not worthy to be the son. The father doesn't even let him finish and just puts all the sonship garb on him. There's a strong belief in me that people are actually designed to be in relationship with God. They're spiritual beings and they can't help it. In schools, they can tell us we can't evangelise and proselytise, and that's fine. We're happy to comply with what the school says in that way, but no one can legislate against the human being's yearning and heart desire to be in connection with God. We're spiritual beings. You can't say we can't have spiritual conversations because every person is designed to be doing that. Their life is spiritual. So if we keep our eyes open to such things and we engage with people in such a way, then we can't help but have our ears pricking and our eyes kind of looking for the little signs of God at work in that person's life already. And I guess that's the other thing I think is wonderful. Not only are people God's people by right, but actually God is active and interested in their life long before I turn up to have any spiritual conversation. So I'm tuning into what God is already doing. I'm tuning into the activity and presence of God in the lives of people. And that really does start to change the way that you want to have spiritual conversations with people. It does change the one-way nature. It does change the one-size-fits-all kind of approach, because what you're really trying to find out is how is this child of God, how has God already been working in their life? How can I find that out and join in and build on and be a catalyst to do the thing that God is trying to do next? How can I be a part of that? It's a very, very different approach and requires of us different things. When I think about the most recent kind of spiritual kind of conversation that I had that stands in mind, it's about a teacher. So I haven't been a chaplain now for over 20 years, but I'm still a chaplain to a bunch of people who are staff, or even some kids who are now grown up with their own kids growing up. They haven't moved on to a new God person yet, so I'm still stuck in that role with them. But there's a guy now, he'd be 70. He was a teacher when I was there, and we got on really, really well. We had a good group of staff that we got on quite well. His wife has now got dementia and is living in a home, and she was a wonderful part of that group. So a good friend of mine, a good friend of ours. And he comes past every so often on his bike and comes in for a cup of tea, and we just have a chat about how she's going and how he's going and all of that. And I think I've done 2 weddings, 3 baby namings, and 2 funerals for that family already. So we're talking about lots of things about life and death and how all the family are. And he's talking to me about his wife and where she's at. And he's kind of just saying, but you just did that pause, where your pat's going to go down to the deeper level. He said, it really does make me stop and ask some questions. And he's always that kind of guy that says, I'm not a Christian. Me and the man upstairs, if I go into a church, it'll fall down. That kind of guy that always talks a bit like that, I'm not sure about God. But then he starts telling me about, but when I ride my bike along the waterfront down there at Wynnum, and I stand and look at the sky, I just can't help but think that there's someone or something good, powerful and designing behind all of that I should really kind of tap into a little bit, and I'm kind of going, really? I think I've read about that somewhere in a book called the Bible that I've got, and then he said, but I see my wife with a dementia, and I kind of realised that there's a brokenness to the world as well. So it should be really good. It looks really good, but it's not. There's some brokenness. And I go, I've read this in the first few chapters of the Bible, So we're having a conversation about that. He's talking to me about what he has just observed in life, what God has revealed to him. God is doing a work in that man's life. I'm not bringing God to him in our conversation. I'm listening and going, wow, you are experiencing from God directly a revelation about how things really are in the world, and he is drawing you in. And so my job is to be a part of that conversation and affirm that. Actually say, I said, God sounds like he's doing something in you. You might not be sure about him, but I think God's sure about you. He's got some designs on you, And we were able to have a talk about that, and I was able to affirm that work of God going on in his life. So I really think that when it comes to spiritual conversations, that first part is about being curious. It's about being attentive. It's about having the eyes and ears to see and hear God at work in the life of someone, and to be able to tune into that and build on. Because a lot of people don't have the religious ideas. They don't have the Christian language. If we start talking to me even about God and judge and sin and heaven and hell and the road to this and that and how it all kind of works, people aren't coming out of that space. It's not the world that they're inhabiting, but if they are spiritual creatures, they are having that experience of trying to work out their way back to God, trying to wrestle with God or resist God. This is the fundamental sort of dynamic and motion of their life. And we need to be good hearers of that. We need to be good recognizers of that and hear the other language they use when they talk about that. So it might be questions about existence or shakiness or trust or identity or meaning or purpose. I think meaning is a very, very big concept that people are worried about in this life and not even know that that's what they're worried about. I think life in the West lacks a lot of deep meaning. There's a lot of surface and a lot of distraction. And I think people are kind of going, that's not right. That's not enough. They're yearning for more. And we've got to become good hearers of those things. We've got to become good noticers of those kind of things. And this is the kind of territory, I think, of the kind of engaging spiritual conversations that we need to have with people. And I really believe that as we look at Jesus, what we see is a person who is amazing at that. When I think about spiritual conversations, I think about them as an art form. And in this way, Jesus is an artist. He's an absolute craftsman when it comes to being able to engage with people, discern what's going on, and to be able to help them take the next steps in that part, and help them not just get different ideas and beliefs in their head, but help them be transformed in their lives. And that's what we really want to turn our attention to now in this part of the presentation. What I want to do is to invite you to we're going to take maybe at least 5-10 minutes, we'll just see how we go, to explore these passages. So you'll see they're on the screen. I've got 7 passages, and these passages just outline brief kind of spiritual conversations that Jesus had. Now, of course, they're not all the spiritual conversations Jesus had. There's plenty I could have picked from, but I picked these 7 just to kind of narrow it down to some that we can have a look at. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to take out your Bible or Bible device, and I'm going to invite you to just take this 5 minutes at least, and we'll just see how you're going. If you want some more time, we'll give you a bit more, up to 10, is to read 1 really well, 2 a bit well, all 7 really quickly. What I want you to do is just take some time to look at these examples of spiritual conversations that Jesus is having with different people. They're all quite different. They kind of highlight different things. You'll see on the side there I've got what, why, and why. What I want you to think about are these 3 things. What kind of things do you see Jesus doing in each conversation? What kind of little techniques or things is he doing? Okay, so the first question is, what do you see him doing? All right. The second question is, why do you think he's doing that particular thing in the conversation? So if you see him say something, you think, what did he say that? What's he saying that for? What did he use that technique for? All right, so what do you see him doing? Why do you think he's doing that? And the third question is the deeper why. If Jesus is doing those things, why? What's his end game? What's the point of all these techniques? What's he trying to do in the life of that person? Going deeper. So a what, why, and a deeper why. All right. So so we're just going to go quiet for a bit. We're going to give you time to check out as few or as many of those passages as you like, and think about those questions. And again, we'll come back as a group and we'll have a chance to talk about what it is that you found in your answers to those what, why, and why questions. Over to you. Okay, I'll get you to just wrap it up on the story that you're on there. I'm going to ask Linda to have her microphone ready to go. So I'm interested in hearing anyone's thoughts on their what, why, and why answers in any stories that they came across. So I'm just happy to hear from anyone. If you just read one story, you might just want to tell us some of the things you saw Jesus doing, why you think he did that, and maybe the deeper why. Where's he trying to get to with that person in using those kind of conversational techniques? So, and so if you're one of the first ones to go on a particular story, just give us a brief summary of which story that you chose and what's going on in that story, because you can't really tell from my snappy little headings. So, anyone like to have a go first? It'll be really relevant. Deeply relevant.
So I looked at the big question and the big question again.
Yeah.
What struck me about those two stories was the fact that everybody had a shared framework. In a sense, they understood. Jesus asked pertinent questions, but they also, the people that he spoke to, had a shared framework. And so it raises questions for me, because we live in a society that doesn't have a shared, like you've already pointed that out. And so in some ways, Jesus deconstructs by asking, he sort of, people have got this framework and he's wanting to kind of cut across that.
Yes.
And so he deconstructs. But in some ways, we've almost got to construct a sort of a narrative, or construct something
Yes.
that somebody can even understand, because you've got the secularism, which is
Yes.
is almost kind of the assumed kind of framework out there. So my question is, I guess, and I'm sorry if I've kind of not answering, but I don't often have many answers, but I do have lots of questions about what does it look like for us in our current climate where there is not a shared. Like I think of France, for instance, where if one of their major philosophers dies, the whole country goes out in mourning, and everybody knows who Foucault is and who all of that. There's a shared framework, and in some ways that framework, even though a very secular country, is not dissimilar, because it's got the same basic questions about meaning.
Yes.
But in an Australian context, where there's not even that. In France, all high school students learn philosophy. Well, our students learn economics and politics and stuff like that. So the place where a question can be asked is not shared. I guess that's my puzzle. If someone can give me an answer to that.
Great.
I'd appreciate it.
So in a sense, the core question is, in the absence of a clear mutual framework of reference, how do you even kick off the conversations? Yeah, I mean, I have a few thoughts about that, but I'm thinking that I'm going to leave them to the end, if that's okay, because I love sidetracks, and they're more interesting and important than the things I often want to say and do. So you and I would be going, just excuse us for a minute, like that's. But I think we'll save that to the end. But make sure we don't leave that, because that's a really profound question about the territory of our conversations. So if I was going to then reduce some of that back to some of the simpler things that I'm trying to get at the moment, I would say you've got these questions that Jesus is asking around ideas that people have got that kind of are trying to break down some things. That would be sort of my reframing of your, me getting the answers I want out of your why. He's asking questions to kind of deconstruct some things to kind of break people open a little bit. So, I like you. Someone else, another story that you had a look at. What did you see going on? Oh yes, can you just describe? All right, then you got to run around.
So the first one was the young man who says, "What must I do
to get eternal life?"
For eternal life?" The rich young ruler, yeah. And then the other big question, I've forgotten. Luke's, it was just Good Samaritan. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is
who is? Yeah.
Yes. It leads to the second lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I love about that story, just as a bit of an aside, is a good teacher. Good teacher, and you get asked the question that everybody wants to get asked. If I was a chaplain and someone came to me and said, "Can you tell me about the eternal life?" I'd be salivating. You'd just be getting so excited that someone had even asked that question. And then Jesus goes off on these tangents about, "Why do you call me good?" It's like someone's gone, "Dear sir," at the beginning of the letter, and it'll be kind of gone past the letter and gone, "Why did you use dear sir at the beginning?" Like, hold on a minute. I've just shared with you I want the answer to the biggest question ever. And yet in doing that, again, Jesus, a question asking cuts through some stuff. And he gets to the heart of goodness and goodness as part of God, and who am I to you then as God? Like, it's quite remarkable, you know. It's quite, but you know, for most of us, we get sucked. It's like the door opening the crack, you know. We go straight through and get sucked into the eternal life question. But Jesus somehow manages to see something else going on and ask the question to cut through something and get to another whole place. You know, remarkable stuff. An artist.
I just looked at the first two again, but I was looking more for patterns, as you said, the what, the why. So, and in it seemed to me like Jesus would, they'd come with a question or a statement, and he'd answer back with another question or a statement. And I thought, why is he doing that? And I think it's just to find out what they knew, because they all were from different backgrounds and I guess had different thoughts on life, and he wanted to know what they knew. And then his next question seemed to be a deeper one, either a question or a statement that then got them thinking to, they probably didn't even know the answer to, and then he came back to, well, I have the answer here, but he doesn't say that, he just gives them something again to think about. So it's sort of like this pattern of,
it's amazing questions, and then a kind of a sharing of some idea or statement that again might sort of crack some things open for somebody. Awesome, thank you. Oh, nice.
Was that for me?
Hello.
Okay. Hi. I actually went to the last one, the bit tricky one, Luke 24, and it seemed to be the way he met up with the people walking from Emmaus, and you know why they were downcast, and the fact that he actually asked them, you know, what were you talking about? You know, it's probably not a normal thing that someone would ask. And then they went on with, and in this, you know, I kind of put Jesus as kind of acting ignorant in the fact that he knew what had happened, but he was saying, well, what things? You know, so he was wanting them to open up about what they knew.
Yes.
And the thing I found interesting was then he kind of he rebukes them and tells them how foolish they are, and yet they still didn't know who he was. And I know it wasn't included in that verse, but you know the fact that they invited him to stay, I kind of found it interesting that they kind of didn't click. It wasn't till, and it's, as I said, it's not included till they were partaking of the bread together that it was almost like their eyes were open through that. But it was interesting that he kind of did the reverse role, finding out what they knew more than him telling the whole story. So that was
Yes, because
so
he knew what had happened. He was the central character in what had happened, and yet he stood back and said, "Well, what happened?" You know, like it literally is, as you say, playing dumb. He's being a bit tricky.
Yeah, that's right. And the fact that he tells them how slow they are to believe, who wants to be told that? Really?
Right.
Well, as a student, sometimes I think sometimes we're slow to learn. But yeah, so that was my little thoughts from that.
Yeah, and I see in that case, Jesus creating a space, for people to talk out and discuss and work through and listen to each other and kind of, is that what happened? What are you doing? And kind of, creating a space almost for people to bounce off each other and to work through something and to process it a little. But someone who clearly knew all the answers to what had happened steps back and goes, so tell me what happened. Process that event. Like, what was going on for you? How did you experience that? So you again digging down deeper. Why is Jesus doing that? He seems to me on some level he's appreciating the process of what people might get from that kind of engagement with their own thoughts and with each other people who'd had a shared experience. And also, as part of that, of course, he does some enlightening. He actually also shares with them some insights and thoughts about how it all fits together. So we're getting a bit of a combination of creating a space, some question asking, but also, again, this idea of bringing in some good key ideas that are going to help them scaffold or grow their understanding. Thanks. You got the mic.
I do, and I'm doing the one from Matthew chapter 15,
yes.
where Jesus answers Dean's question and goes against Lynn's advice here.
Yeah.
He answers Dean's questions because he goes to Lebanon, and so he's out of that common framework, and yet still this woman comes to him with a problem. So it's a Syrophoenician woman looking for her daughter to be healed. And in that, even though there's a different religious framework, there's still that same basic human need that exists there, that my daughter's ill, I need help. Jesus doesn't answer any questions with anything. He just keeps quiet and he ignores her. And that's kind of a curious thing there. I think, though, that in that passage, Jesus is as much trying to show the disciples something as he is trying to draw something out of this woman. So I think there's a couple of different things happening in this story, but he certainly is, the passages before that, he's breaking down that barrier between us and them.
Yes.
And so often they're the others who we don't want to talk to, who we would rather avoid. And in his avoiding her, he actually draws her deeper into that conversation, and then calls her a dog in the process. And in that whole episode, she actually comes out as the one who shows greater faith than the others, and so that's always curious to discover faith amongst those who we've written off as other and as dogs and rubbish.
Yeah, awesome. I'll have to admit to you, I'm never 100% sure what's going on in that passage. I've never have settled on what I think is going on there. In my more stranger moments, I go, did that woman change Jesus' mind about something? But my suspicion is that actually Jesus was doing something quite provocative there and got her to the point of saying, hold on a minute, isn't it supposed to look like this? And maybe quietly in there somewhere Jesus goes, yeah, good work. Like that's where I was hoping we would get to in this engagement. But quite provocative in being able to get someone to say, hold on a minute, shouldn't the world be like this? Shouldn't that be the way it is? Shouldn't God be? Yeah, probably. Yeah, could be. Yeah, okay. I'm never quite exactly sure what's going on there, but I think again, there's some amazing artistry going on. There's something quite profound going on between the two of them. So there's something quite special happening there. Probably got time just for, I know we haven't gone through every single story, but maybe just one more. Does someone else have a burning thing they'd like to share from a different story maybe that hasn't come through yet?
Just with when the Pharisees come to Jesus to ask about where they should be paying taxes, and he's saying he can see their wickedness. And I just thought, I think discernment is something that he sees where they're coming from straight away.
Yes.
And sometimes we do have people who are just, they're there, they're not serious about things. They're just almost mocking. But he shows discernment there before and comes straight to the point.
Yes. And that's almost,
I looked at that same passage, and the thing that intrigued me was that Jesus is almost saying, I mean, when someone comes with an antagonistic approach, they want to push it. It's either or, this or that. Jesus says, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's both and, so
that's right.
It blows the whole rationale out of the water.
Yeah, so Jesus cracks open that. Yes, it's not really this or this. It's let's look at something else. Yeah, wonderful. And what a amazingly spiritual worldview that is, to be able to move out of this kind of back and forward sometimes and to see from a whole different angle something. But yeah, this idea that some people come and with an antagonistic view, some people come just to cause trouble, and even with it's a trap one. It's kind of like, look, I think you're trying to trap me. I'm not really wanting to get trapped today, so we're not playing the game. So sometimes there's an honesty about the motives and those kind of things. So when we look through these different kinds of stories, and of course these are just some of the many different engagements that Jesus had, we could have picked a whole lot of stories. We see this quite creative, quite engaging, sometimes provocative, very sort of wrangling, wrestling, way of handling these conversations. It's quite an amazing thing to be a witness of. There's some amazing things going on there, and Jesus truly is, I think, the conversational artist, and it gets us I think it's me wondering what's that all about, thinking about that deeper why. Jesus is clearly not just providing all the answers. He's clearly not providing a one-size-fits-all message. He's clearly looking for a two-way engagement. And so there seems to be something that he really values about what's going on for the life of each of the people that he is engaging with. He seems to think they're bringing something. They've got something to offer for the exchange. And it's possible that he is also being changed and transformed in the exchange. And certainly we see with Paul and Peter and other evangelists in the scripture, they're wrestling as well. They're engaging. They come across certain scenarios and they're changed as well. It's not all happening one way in these exchanges. There's these genuine mutual kind of interactions going on between people. And Jesus is looking for transformation at this level. He's looking for some wrestling and wrangling. And quite often these conversations and the techniques that he uses don't lead to everybody having everything tied off and all sorted out. Quite often the result seems to be the opposite. People are left with threads left dangling. They're left walking away. They're left wondering. They're left with a question that they asked, ignored, and a whole other question engaged with. It's craziness, and it's beautiful. And it's something that, again, we should be watching and looking at and going, what do you want us to do in that? What are you trying to do in the lives of people, Jesus? What do you want me to follow you into in these spaces? How would you like me to take what you did and do in ways in my own conversations? So I have got a list I prepared earlier. All right, I thought I'd better come with something other than just all your ideas, because otherwise you could have just done this over dinner. Oh yes, we did talk about that. Okay, I'm going to go through. Yeah, so I'm going to go through. I've kind of looked at these stories and come up with sort of 7 techniques that I've based, I guess, on Jesus' own tips and techniques. All right, and so you'll see that when we look up there on this list, there are things that have come out in your own observations of the stories that we've just had a look at. So I've kind of adapted some of them for our own context and stuff, and I'll explain them as we go through. So what I want to do in this last little section is just to go through each of these 7 sort of tips and talk about them as ways we could change the way we have spiritual conversations to look a bit more like some of these amazing things we've seen Jesus do. So you'll see that we're going to look at observing, listening, and discerning. So that came out before. Asking questions, the parables, or what I'm going to talk about is disruptive stories or statements. We're going to talk about, my numbering's gone a bit funny there. I just noticed that for the first time. Owning and grounding, 2 ideas for when we're sharing ideas with other people, how to do that in a way that still creates a space. Creating a space for disagreement or independent thought. And then this idea of elevating the conversation, the bigger deeper, going to some of the bigger, broader issues. And these are the things that I see Jesus doing that I think we can incorporate in our conversations. So let's start with the first one, and it's one that we noticed in the stories before. Jesus seemed to have this, and I'm sort of being a little bit flippant here. There seemed to be this sort of magic Jesus thing going on sometimes, this spirit-filled Jesus, this kind of ability that he had to supernaturally discern people's motives, people's hearts, people's intentions, what they were thinking, and also seemed to have some kind of insight into some of their life story, the things that had gone on in their lives before he met them. Now, all I want to say about that is I don't have that ability. I know very few people that do. I don't have it. But, somewhere in my deep, dark past, for my sins, I did a social work degree, and they taught me how to do active listening. And they taught me how to listen to someone and hear someone's story and try and, take a step into their world. So if you're like me and you don't have magic Jesus discernment abilities, it's okay. All right? We can do it the old-fashioned way. We do it the hard way, the long way, the road way. We can stop and listen and observe and take some time to find out about someone and listen to their story and hear about what's going on. This was really important to Jesus. However he did it, whether he did it kind of more supernaturally or did it kind of naturally, it was really important for him to know what was going on in the world of each person. And so we get a different story, a different conversation between him and Nicodemus than we do between him and the Samaritan woman, than we do between him and Zacchaeus. You see what I mean? We actually get these very different stories. We get very different engagements. We get very different topics of conversation. We get very different next steps of the kingdom. It's not an abstract God, sin, Jesus, make a choice, sort yourself out forever. It's actually, Zacchaeus, you've got to you've been naughty, you've been unjust, and not only do you have to sort of stop doing that, but you're going to have to do some reparation. That's what your next step into the kingdom journey probably looks like, and they have a bit of negation. Nicodemus, he's very religious, so they're having a very religious. You need to step out of that, and it's some spiritual stuff you need to think about. You need to think a bit about being reborn in your spirit. That's a thing that you might, want to crack open a little bit in your world to take the next step that you need to take into the kingdom. The Samaritan woman, you've got some relationship stuff going on. That's kind of clear, but we're also going to have a chat about mountains and worship. They're different conversations because there's been some sense of taking a step into the world of that person. And in a sense, Jesus tailor makes his gospel engagement with each person based on his understanding of their world. So I think this is really important. It's that real step one, and it really is one of those first clear things in my mind that challenges that one size fits all, one way kind of process. Jesus takes the time to understand the world of a person. And it's on that basis that he then connects the good news of himself into their world and has a next step for them to take that he's kind of worked out with them to be important. So we need to be curious. We need to be genuinely interested in people. We need to learn to love people and love their stories. We need to be observant of what we see as they tell us their stories. We need to be good listeners and be active listeners. We also need to have a sense of what we're listening for. We need to sort of, as we're listening, so the little flags or the little bells ring. And so we're kind of getting that sense of what is God doing here? What are the needs, the yearnings, the desires? Where are the connecting points? Where's the gaps? Where's the things that God is already doing? And to be able to sort of be listening for those things and hear them. And to encourage those things. So this is a really important first one, observing, listening and discerning where people are at. We need to take the time to get into the worlds of people to be able to connect our gospel message to their situation. And this one's pretty clear. This one came up a lot of times, didn't it? There's lots of different reasons that Jesus seemed to be asking questions. My personal policy on if someone asks me as a question is to never give them an answer straight up. I always ask at least two questions about the question. My view is you never really know what's been asked until you've dug behind the question a bit and found out the story. That's maybe the social worker in me. My wife hates it. Like that's when you get frying pans thrown at you. Just answer the question. So you're not really. No, there's another frying pan. So not everybody likes it, but I think it's really important. I believe every question has a story behind it. And you can't really appropriately answer a question until you found out a bit more about that story. What's that question about? Often people aren't asking a question for you to give them an answer. Oftentimes they ask a question so they can tell you their answer to that question. Or they want to start a conversation about something, or there's a pastoral need. Don't expect, as a chaplain, I didn't expect that if a kid came up to me and asked me questions about homosexuality, that they wanted a textbook answer about homosexuality, as if there was one, I may say. But I almost always assume it was a pastoral question. That maybe the real question they're asking is, if I come out to you as being gay, will you still like me? Will we be okay? So what's the question about? So I always encourage people to, even if you have one question up your sleeve, which is always, that's a great question, tell me more about where that comes from. So you don't even have to think about having a special question, even if you just have that question up your sleeve. Finding out the story behind each question or each topic with a question is really, really important. As we see Jesus ask them all the time. Let me show you this. I love this. This is a little quiz just to kind of just to break things up a little bit. Okay, across the Gospels, Jesus is asked how many questions? So you can kind of lock this in your own head, Okay, was it 25, 96, 183 or 264? Everyone got their guesses locked in? All right. 183. Who was right? You gonna admit? Yeah, right, yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, actually, yeah, maybe that's what I did. Okay, next question. Across the Gospels, Jesus gives a straight answer to how many of these 183 questions? Is it 3, 8, 56, or all 183? Lock it in. Now, that's clear. That's between 3 and 8 because the book I got this out of from said it depends how straight you like your straight answer. So some people would say 3 and some people would say 8 depending on how straight. 183 questions, 3 to 8 straight answers. I'm sure I grew up thinking Jesus was the answer man. He's the question man, as it turns out. Across the Gospels, how many questions did Jesus ask other people? Both friends and foes often experience the wonderfulness of his questions. 50, 121, 238, 307. Lock it in. Across the four Gospels, 307 questions Jesus asked other people. This is a big tool in the tool belt. It's not everything he does, but if we haven't got questions in our tool belt, we're not having spiritual conversations the way Jesus has them. That's a really important tool. Jesus uses this ability to ask questions, to confront, to challenge, to create space, to get people thinking, to unravel them a little bit, to let them talk to each other and learn from each other. He's got a number of different reasons why he's asking different questions. We've got to learn to become really good question askers. Oh, this is one of the books that I read that really helped me in this space was Jesus Asked by Conrad Kemp. And he says, if you met Jesus in the street, he was more likely to ask you something than to tell you something. So again, a big journey in really discovering that about Jesus from my early spiritual conversation training, which was all about telling somebody. Number 3, parables. Earthly stories with a heavenly meaning was what I was told again when I was young. And really, when I was young, again, I was kind of told parables were these stories that Jesus told to take complex heavenly things and put them in earthly terms to help us understand them. I'm not quite sure that's what I think parables are anymore. I really feel like parables are those disruptive stories. They're stories designed to challenge and unravel. We listened to a story the other day about John Smith. Some of you may have heard this story. Not John Smith, who was the kind of God Squad bikie guy who had this interaction with a stripper. Came to something that he was presenting and said, can you meet me at this address a bit later on? I want to talk to you some more. And it ended up being the strip club. And John Smith goes to the strip club and meets this lady and talks with her. And she says, I really wanted to be a dancer. I've come up with this dance that's the story of my life. Would you stay and watch it? And so he stays and watches this dance, which somehow reflects the story of her life. Now, we talked about this in my team at work. And people kind of said, yeah, I get him going to the strip club to talk to her. I think he went too far when he stayed for the dance. And one was shocked and one was saying, well, what about that? I said, you know what? I think we're having the experience of having heard a parable. I said, because we read about the Good Samaritan and we go, oh, and it was really shocking for them to hear that a Samaritan was the hero of the story. How shocking was that? Yeah, really shocking. Yeah, they were so shocked. And we kind of go, wow, would have been terrible. But we had this experience of having a story that shocked us. And I went, we've just heard a parable. Like, I don't know whether he should stay for the dance or not, but I tell you what, we had an amazing discussion and we asked a bunch of questions and we wrestled and we helped each other and we kind of went, wow, I actually think we've just had a first-hand experience of listening to a parable. It was a disruptive story. It challenged. I don't know what's right and wrong about that story still, but we had an amazing discussion and it challenged us and got us thinking about where is God? What does it mean to engage with someone? When someone has a deep need to share their story, but it looks like that, should we be listening? Amazing stuff. So parables are these powerful, disruptive stories that are designed to disrupt and challenge us. So rather than being stories that bring things together for us, they can be stories that are actually designed to break us apart. In a good way. And sometimes Jesus is looking for that to happen in our lives. So I'm not very good at coming up with parables. I'm not creative. I can't make up stories like that, but there are existing parables to draw on. Some people are writing modern parables. Some people just have stories like that on hand that are just simply challenging, that get people thinking through something. So my advice again in this is to have some disruptive stories up your sleeve. Just some things that in the mix of things get people thinking and wondering and challenging on whatever topic that you're into. So parables or disruptive stories, I think that's a really important. So Jesus sometimes explained things. He sometimes told things and said, "This is something I want you to know." So 2 things I wanted to say about that, which are more slight sort of adaptations on what Jesus does. But the first thing is what we call an owning statement. So what we're saying here is rather than creating these absolute truth statements that we might make sometimes about the Christian faith, which really kind of either get people sometimes they want to be confronting, but sometimes people have to reject or accept a statement. But if you just step back a little bit, you're trying to create a space for the discussion, for the engagement, for people to step into, to be able to say, well, this is where I'm at the moment with this. This is what I believe at the moment about this particular thing about God or the gospel or Jesus or where things are heading in the world. I feel this is the way it is. In my experience, what I've found is you could also talk about your own journey. I've actually had different views on this. I'm actually undecided about that. I have a few different things that I'm not sure about. So an owning statement is a statement in the conversation that talks about where you're at with something. And that's a really good tool to have. And sometimes we get confused but and think that what we believe is the answer to the question, and that's the answer I should be giving. It's one tool in the tool, but again, it shouldn't be the whole tool belt. So to be able to talk about the beliefs that we have and statements that are important to us, or experiences or questions that we have, and own them for ourselves is a really important skill to add. And alongside that is this idea of grounding, the idea that we ground statements in their source. So rather than saying God is the source, we can say, well, the Christians believe that God is, or the Bible teaches us that, or and this church has a view that looks like this. So we ground the statements that we're making in the sources that they come from, particularly the Bible or Christian tradition, Christian thought, but sometimes it might be trying to explain different views about something. So to ground the idea that they're in different places. So that's a really important thing. Again, it takes a statement out of a absolute truth statement that someone has to either bounce off or kind of walk into. It creates a space for people to say, oh, that's interesting that they believe that. That's the true thing. They actually can't argue with that. That's the statement that they have, or that's what that scripture says. But at least they can step into the space with you and talk about what that might mean for them. All right, two more. We've just gone a little bit late, sorry. The last two, here we go. The sixth one is, we see this in this one about the Canaanite woman, the one where Jesus is talking about dogs in Israel and what he's there for and that kind of thing. He creates this space for disagreement, for kind of robust engagement. Sometimes he's a bit provocative. But it is really important at different times to make space for the different views that people will have on different things in the spiritual discussion. It's a fairly broad church, and if you can pick, I'd love to ask you a question about what you think about this aspect of Jesus or this part of the kingdom of God in this room. And I'm sure in this room we would have a number of different kind of views, even if they were just kind of nuanced in different ways. So we need to be able to create space for the broad church or the broad agreement or disagreement on a range of topics. And there's a few examples there. Christians do believe different things about this particular issue. That's an interesting view, but here's another way you might like to think about that, or here's another way other people in the Christian world would think about that. And sometimes it's not a problem to say, well, that's an interesting view. I don't think, generally that view wouldn't be, held by the Christian world. And some people you're talking to wouldn't even care about that, wouldn't be considered to be an insult. It would just be a statement about the way things are. But sometimes it's just good to be able to kind of talk about these things and create that space and say, yeah, we're not all going to agree. And even all the people that gather around Christ don't always agree on a lot of these things. So I always think about that Twitter tag, join the conversation. You're a part of a conversation that's been going for 2,000 years. It's still going and hasn't stopped. I'm really appreciating your interest and your engagement in this particular spiritual question. So wow, welcome, join in. It's great that you're interested and have a view, you hate the Bible, you think it's a load of nonsense. Tell me all about all the reasons why you hate the Bible and think it's a load of nonsense. I can't wait to hear every single one of them. Let's talk through it all. That's amazing. Wow, I can't believe you've got such a strong opinion. That must have really come from somewhere. Let's get into it. And as a chaplain, I would be thrilled if someone came to me to talk about that, because mostly people wouldn't even care. Have any interest at all. You want to tell me about why you hate everything that I believe in? Oh, thank goodness. Someone's at least interested. All right, one more. The last one here, and this is elevating and digging deeper. And sometimes Jesus basically took the questions that people were asking and said, that's a good question, but it's the wrong one to ask. Well, you want to know how to limit your neighbours, like who are my neighbours, so I don't need to know. Let me tell you a story about how everyone you might come across will be your neighbour. You're going to have, we're breaking down the barriers here. You've asked the wrong question. There's a bigger principle at stake. There's a bigger idea that I want you to tap into. So sometimes Jesus would take a conversation to that bigger point, that bigger idea, that beautiful gospel part that actually he really wanted people to get to. And the other thing that happens sometimes is we get bogged down in the minutiae of a conversation, or we get in the contested part, and everyone, I'm not quite sure. We're getting muddled in what people believe and what the Greek says, and I'm not really sure. And and people kind of get bogged at a certain level. And sometimes it's really good to be able to say, you know what? A lot of people are going to get stuck down here. One of the things I'm a little bit more certain of, is that Jesus has invited everyone to the party, and all people should be welcome. I'm not sure about these verses about homosexuality and who's in and what's out and the LGBTI, this and that. And people think this and that one's in the Bible. I don't really know about it. What I do know at the end of the day is that everyone's been invited to the party. The doors are open. And the people that we don't expect are being invited in, and apparently they're coming. So that's an idea that we could kind of concentrate on or just focus on at the end of this discussion that's gone a little bit all over the place. So sometimes just elevating the conversation or digging down deeper can kind of help us to sort of just get to a point in the conversation that sort of takes it to another level. All right. So I'm really aware that we've gone over time, so I do apologise for that. So there's our seven sort of skills that just summarised again. We won't worry about that. Blah, blah, blah. That's where we've got to. Too much blah, blah, blah. What we would sometimes do when we have these kind of training days is we will go back to some of our earlier discussion about what were some of the topics that you have spiritual conversations about. Or I would go back to this diagram. This is a Crindle diagram about belief blockers. These were things that Australian people said, these are the things that really rile me up. I really want to yell at someone Christian about it and ask about homosexuality and hell and suffering. These are the things that block me from kind of really wanting, And what we would do is if we had like another, half a day, which we sometimes do for our practical sides of these things, is we actually get into little groups and we actually practice some of these skills and talk about, so someone comes to you and says, Chappie Steve, I went to church the other night and the minister said all the gays are going to hell. Tell me what you think. That's a fascinating question. Tell me a bit more about where that came from. We start to apply the skills and go, oh, so what do you already know about that? Where did you, and what resonates with you about that? What do you like about that? What do you not like? So you start to have the conversation. I read in the paper the other day that someone said this about that. And, so you start to use the techniques and have a practice of them. So we certainly aren't going to do that tonight. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that as your homework, which I'm not going to check. But I'm going to suggest that what you do is you take either some of these topics or some of the questions or things that have come up to you in the past and actually sit down and have a go. You don't have to play out a role play or do whatever, but actually go, what questions would I use? Is there a disruptive story I'd have up my sleeve? Because I think if some of these topics are some of the main things that come up for us, it's actually good to do a little bit of preparation on those things. And actually to be a little bit ready, sort of pack out our tool belt a little bit with some of the specific tools we're going to need for different specific jobs we think might be ones that we come up with. So I'm going to set that homework. I'm going to say, think about the topics, think about the things that people are interested in, think about the spiritual yearnings and desires that come up for people. And if someone came up to you and wanted to have a conversation with you about what kind of tools of Jesus' tool belt would you use to be able to have conversations that look a bit more like the ones that he had. So look, that'll be all from me in terms of. Oh, sure. Oh, of course. So, okay, so just a few minutes of questions. So thanks again for your patience and graciousness in all of that. Yeah, so we're returning back to this question. When we're struggling with different kind of frameworks, how do we engage with people when those frameworks aren't common? And look, in my experience, that is one of the big mission questions. I really feel like one of the big mission questions is one, I don't know if it's the right word, but it's kind of translation. But it's not translation just of words, it's translation of culture, of belief and ideas. The thing that comes to mind mostly about that, and I believe this gentleman up the back here kind of said it in a different way, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of a bit of an answer to this question, is sometimes we've got to go beyond the words and the concepts, and we've got to go back to that human heart, that human being, because the thing I think we all have in common, regardless of the kind of higher layers of ourselves in terms of ideas and culture and beliefs and those kind of things, I think you've got to keep going down till you find the common bit, and the common bit may be as common as that human yearning for meaning, identity, belonging, purpose, whatever those kind of basic needs are. So sometimes I feel like when we've got different cultures and frameworks, really what those things are trying to do is trying to solve that deeper set of yearnings and problems and goals that are essentially common in human. So I keep feeling like if we dig deep enough, we can at least be saying to someone, what I see you trying to do there is solve the thing that I have to solve as well in my life, which is I'm trying to work out how to be safe. I'm trying to work out how I belong. I'm trying to work out who I am and where the world is heading. And at least trying to find the common ground on that, basic humanity kind of thing. And to see if I'm here and someone's there in my different worldviews, if we both get to hear together, at least work out that there's something in common, that we're both human beings. So that saying about, I'm just the beggar trying to help the other beggars where to find the good bread. If I can kind of help the other person and myself see that commonality, that we're both actually on the same kind of journey, trying to sort out the same existential human issues. I think if we go deep enough, we do find some of that commonality, and we acknowledge that wherever we're in different places, that God hardwired sort of thing we have to do, we have to solve, we have to resolve, that's something we do have in common. I think somewhere in there, as a simple-ish kind of answer to that kind of question, somewhere in there is part of the way.